All right, good morning, PTNI's daily show. Apologize for the fiddling here. Not my usual spot. I'm in a hotel in Milwaukee, up here teaching with Jeff and our good friend Rachel Selena this weekend. So I'm not in my usual element. And as you know, I'm a type 6, so I don't like when stuff isn't organized and going my way. So Fitness Athlete Friday, happy to be joining you here as part of the Fitness Athlete Division, also as the COO of ICE. And today we're going to talk about my jam. If you know anything about me, you know that I love all things heart rate variability, all things related to heart rate variability research. So today we're going to talk about heart rate variability, an article that just came out in this month's Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research about heart rate variability, specifically relating to acute training loads. So if you're not familiar with heart rate variability, we've talked about it on here a couple times before. The variance and the beat-to-beat difference of your heartbeat. It tells us a lot about the status of your autonomic nervous system. It tells us a lot about both the load you're putting on your body and your recovery. So it can tell us about your kind of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems based on how you're performing with heart rate variability. So this article... well, that doesn't help. I realize that it's backwards now. This article is Heart Rate Variability and Training Load Among National Collegiate Athletic Association Division I College Football Players Throughout Spring Camp. So this is from the November 2018 issue of Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, the NSCA's journal. And again, I do not hate the NSCA. I read and regularly cite Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So I think my one podcast gave people a bad impression of how I feel about them, but I still read that journal every month. Lots of great stuff coming out of there. So this article asked a great question. Does cardiac autonomic nervous system activity return to baseline between consecutive days of spring training camp? So we know that football players go off to spring camp much like other athletes do, and they train very, very heavy for maybe 7 days, 14 days, or in this case, trained for a whole month. So they had 28 days of training. And they wanted to see, knowing that there's an acute spike in training volume, how does that affect these players' heart rate variability? And then they stratified it by looking at 3 different kind of subclasses of football players. So they have 3 classes, what they call skill, who are receivers and defensive backs, mid-skill, so linebackers, running backs, and tight ends, and then linemen, so just offensive and defensive linemen. And they wanted to see, stratifying these folks out, how does their heart rate variability change day to day? So after their training, as we measure their heart rate variability, do they come back to baseline? Essentially asking, is there enough time to recover in a scenario like spring training camp? Do these folks have enough time to come back to baseline each day, or is the acute training volume spike too high? So the methods were a little bit limited. We'll talk a bit on that later, but 25 people from the University of Alabama football team. This was the team that won the national championship a few years ago. They don't specifically say it, but the IRB was approved by University of Alabama, and all that kind of shows that it's probably this team. 4 weeks of training, so they train 2 hours a day. Week 1, they train 3 days. Weeks 2 and 3, they trained 4 days. So this is skill-specific training. And then back to 3 days, week 4. Every day they had 45 minutes of weightlifting, weightlifting twice a week, not every day. And then the training was, again, position-specific. So agility and speed for running backs, blocking for linemen, that sort of thing. And then Sundays were left open for passive rest. Interesting here, heart rate variability was measured with an app and wearable called Athlete, I-T-H-L-E-T-E, so Athlete. I think it's supposed to just be Athlete, but it's kind of a trendy hipster way to say athlete. The company that makes it is called HRV Fit. I'd never heard of this company before, so they make an app, they make a little chest wearable, and this is measured 60 to 90 minutes before training. So they were not wearing something like a Whoop. They did not have something on 24/7. They came in to the stadium about an hour before training and had their heart rate variability measured, and they went out and trained. So these folks were only having 1 data point captured a day, and then they looked at the results. So pretty interesting results. For the skill and mid-skill, their HRV returned to baseline after each day. So they were able to recover given about 20-ish hours, theoretically, assuming that the players just went back to their room and chilled and didn't go do other stuff. So they were given about 20 hours of recovery. So the skill and mid-skill folks were able to recover. The linebackers were not. So the hypothesis here is that because those linebackers don't really do a lot of aerobic exercise, they're not really all that conditioned. They're kind of just big, strong, and slow. That is the reason why they were not able to recover each day and get their HRV back to baseline. They tracked their heart rate, point heart rate, so instantaneous heart rate with something like a Fitbit during training, but did not track their HRV during training. And what they found is that kind of along with that hypothesis, the linemen actually had a very high anaerobic load during their skill-specific training. They were spiking into as high as 80%, 80-ish percentage of age-adjusted heart rate max. So the work they were doing was very anaerobically challenging for their heart compared to their skill and mid-skill counterparts. And kind of what this shows us is that there's a need for a sort of baseline level of aerobic capacity, kind of that aerobic engine, even in these lineman players, because they didn't really have the aerobic capacity to buffer this acute training load. And while none of these players were injured, it kind of, you can see how if this was to be sustained, or if they were not as strong, that this is certainly a recipe for injury, as they were just not getting the recovery between each training day because they were really not in that good of shape compared to the running backs and the receivers and the tight ends. They were challenged a lot more aerobically by the workouts and were able to recover less. The authors of this paper went on to hypothesize a little bit more that there's a correlation between body mass and reduction in HRV in these athletes, and it may have to do with the fact that they do have more mass, they're sweating more, they're down in Florida, they're sweating more, and they're more dehydrated. So a lot of different confounding factors overall that led to these athletes not being able to recover. So they went 28 days with their HRV never coming back to baseline after the first day. So we know, well, remembering our Gabbett and colleagues, that's kind of a recipe for disaster if we have that long of an acute training spike that's not being managed very well. Paper has a couple limitations. Small sample size, only 25 folks. Only 5 of the folks were actually linemen, so the majority of subjects were the skill and mid-skill players. So taking larger extrapolations from a smaller data pool is always difficult, but still a good paper. I think also a limitation is they weren't tracking the cardiovascular strain during exercise with an HRV device, and they weren't tracking it on rest days. So it's entirely possible on those Sundays when those players did nothing that their HRV may have actually recovered, but we don't know because it only got measured on the 6 days a week when these folks were training. Some good pros of this study: it shows that we can measure HRV one data point, one day, once a day, and still get good data on HRV. We don't need to have something on our wrist maybe 24/7 to get some good data for HRV. We can have people come into the gym or come into the clinic and take their HRV right then and there and still build up a good data set to monitor their recovery and their return to baseline with cardiac autonomic activity. Obviously, something app-based is going to be cheaper than a wearable, and overall it makes it more accessible. So some good pros from this article despite the cons. Still need more data to support the importance of using this, but this is a step in the right direction. There's more and more of these papers every month, which is great. There's usually one every month now, so it seems like it's starting to really pick up steam as far as the research supporting it for those of us who are early adopters who are already using it. And it's great to see that maybe we don't need expensive wearables. Maybe we can get away with something app-based, which makes it much more clinically applicable, much more easier to bring into the gym. So great paper, again, heart rate variability and training load among National Collegiate Athletic Association Division I college football players throughout spring camp, from the November 2018 issue of the Journal in Strength and Conditioning Research. That's all I've got for you. Hope you guys all have a great weekend. Hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving if I don't see you before then. I'm headed out to go drop in at Brew City CrossFit with Jeff and Rachel here in a little bit, and then we're headed off to Marquette to teach to the students, teach some manipulation to students today, and then we have a lumbar course tomorrow. Next weekend we are off for Thanksgiving. No courses next weekend except for online courses. December 1st and 2nd you can catch Mitchell Babcock, the man himself, down in Fort Myers, Florida for Fitness Athlete Live. If you want to catch Fitness Athlete live before the end of the year, that is your last chance. That same weekend, in the same neck of the woods, Jeff will be in Birmingham, Alabama, teaching cervical spine management at Dreyer Physical Therapy. December 8th and 9th, you can catch our very first iteration of Modern Management of the Older Adult live. So Dustin and Christina coming live to St. Louis, Missouri to House Fit. So that's our first time with that. It's traditionally been an online course, but we've had a lot of desire to make it a 2-day in-person seminar. So Dustin and Christina have done that, and they'll be launching that December 8th and 9th in St. Louis. And then finally, December 15th and 16th, Justin will be in Sioux Falls, South Dakota for total spine thrust manipulation. Then that will be our last course for the year. So things are wrapping up quickly here as we approach the end of the year. So go out, get after it, have a great weekend. Try out Athlete by HRV Fit. Play around with it if you're not already playing around with something HRV, and see how it works out for you. Have a great weekend. See you guys next time.